Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the new Samyang Autofocus 24mm F1.8 for Sony FE, or full frame mirrorless. I'm filming with it at the moment on a Sony Alpha 1, and that's the camera that I've used to run the test that will be shown as a part of this review. Now, this is the newest addition to what Samyang calls their Tiny series, and this is a really unique lineup of lenses that I'm not aware of having any kind of comparison on any other platform, and that these are compact, lightweight, inexpensive, and yet really optically excellent lenses that really have proved to be great value for money and are incredibly convenient to bring along. Case in point is this particular lens, which is actually one of the largest of the series, and it is only 71.5 millimeters long and weighs only 230 grams. And so obviously that makes it a very lightweight lens, very easy to bring along, and to me, it's a great complement to, say, if you're going out with a telephoto type lens or maybe a zoom lens that has a range that doesn't go quite as wide as 24 millimeters. It's a great complement to other lenses along. And in many ways, I think that this is the best lens in the series thus far for a number of reasons that we'll detail as a part of this review. But first of all, I want to say thank you to the sponsor of today's episode, who has been a loyal supporter of this channel, and that is Phantom Wallet. Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist, modern wallet that sets you free from a bulky traditional wallet while also making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. Visit phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber. You can even customize your wallet with new accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even the Chipolo tracking integration if you're the kind of person who loses their wallet. Use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out. Now, today we're doing the standard review, and if you want more information, you can check out the definitive or long format review as well. And I dive much deeper into, for example, the image quality as a part of that, autofocus performance, etc. Now, we'll start by taking a look at why I say this is an improved lens by looking at the feature set. That used to be a really short conversation, because when the Tiny series began, it was a small plastic lens with nothing on the exterior outside of a focus ring. But we've seen a steady evolution of the series, starting with the 75mm F1.8, which is a fantastic little short telephoto prime. And that, for the first time, began to include what they call a custom switch that has two modes. And in some ways, I had said at the least, I would love to see an AF/MF switch on there. And so it kind of serves like that, but with an additional bit of functionality, which, as we're going to see, is a bit of a trend with these lenses. And so in this case, you can choose between a couple of different options that are standard, already programmed in. But if you purchase the Samyang Lens Station, which is an additional $59.95 US, but it is valuable to have because it also allows you to do firmware updates along with a few other custom tweaks. But it allows you to change the functionality of that with a few other options. My favorite way to configure the custom switch is to have one mode set up to where it automatically goes into manual focus mode. And so it basically functions like having an AF/MF switch. And then the mode 2 that I like to program on there is to allow the focus ring to act as like an aperture ring to give you direct control over aperture, which I find to be very, very useful. And so that's one step that is included here on the 24mm. With the 35mm F1.8, they added weather sealing into the equation, which of course is kind of self-explanatory in terms of the value. And in this case, we have a lens that has a gasket at the lens mount and a total of 5 seal points. And so around the switches either side of the focus ring. And so obviously, you're going to want to use a wide-angle lens, sometimes in inclement weather. And so it's reassuring to have weather sealing on this particular lens. But starting with this 24mm F1.8, they've added a new feature. Again, it's a familiar Sony type feature, but with a unique Samyang twist, namely that they've added a focus hold button. And that is kind of standard fare on a lot of Sony lenses now, and you can program a variety of functions to that from within the camera body. But the unique Samyang twist is that they're marketing this lens specifically for astrophotography. And so if you hold down that focus hold button with the camera powered off and then power on the camera, it will do something unique. It will automatically focus to the proper distance for shooting stars, just, you know, at the well-calibrated infinity position. And then it will also enable manual focus if you happen to want to make some kind of fine tweak there. And there's even a little LED that will light up as being green when focus is proper, and it will turn to red if you've actually, you know, shifted focus, just so you're aware that focus has shifted in some way. I found it to be very effective, and so right out of the box I got accurate focus for shooting the stars, and so I tried to kind of verify that, and I went back on a separate occasion and I manually focused, and I found that I got the exact same result when I used my typical focusing method. And so certainly a valuable thing there, and there is details on Samyang's website or in the manual for the lens. If it happened to be off, you know, with some body variation, you can also reprogram it to make sure that you're getting perfect focus every time. So obviously that can be useful not only for astrophotography, it also could be useful if you just want to go straight out to infinity focus, you know, out of the box, maybe in a situation where autofocus for some reason it proves to be a little bit challenging. And so while this lens is very lightweight, as we mentioned, it's only 230 grams, and so it's largely, you know, engineered plastics on the exterior around a metal lens mount and some metal interior bits, but it doesn't feel like a plastic fantastic either. It feels like it's reasonably well made, and so far all of the Samyang tiny lenses that I've owned have held up just fine, and this should prove to be no exception to that rule. It has a 58mm front filter thread, and that is shared across a number. I believe 4 of the series currently has that same filter thread, so I always like when there's, you know, some ability to share filters across, which certainly has value to it. It also has 9 rounded aperture blades inside, though I have a minor criticism there in that I find that the blades aren't as rounded as, or evenly rounded as what I find in the best lenses, in that it seems like the aperture is a little bit lopsided, and you can actually see a little bit of that if you look at the, you know, the bokeh shapes in these step-down series. But it didn't seem to make much of a real-world difference, but it might if you're shooting something like bright Christmas tree lights, that kind of scenario. Overall, however, I was really pleased with the overall handling of the lens, and as noted, it's very compact. It comes with a nice little carrying case, comes with the lens hood, a lot of value for money there. Also nicely evolved is the autofocus system here, and there's been a steady progression with Samyang, and I really found that they started to turn a corner when they went from their early micro motors to their linear STM focus motors, which were much smoother and quieter, faster in operation. And that's true here, and one thing that I do like that I had as an earlier criticism is that Samyang has been very good at supporting their lenses with firmware updates, which is excellent, and I have found that they've made a real difference in refining autofocus to where it's increasingly stable and more useful with some of the older lenses. So that's good. However, I have criticized them in times past for sometimes releasing lenses that the autofocus was not yet fully realized, and so it felt like they were kind of engineering on the fly, giving you a beta lens, you know, and then further field testing it and bringing it up to kind of the release firmware long after the lens had been sold. That's not the case here. This lens is very good at autofocusing, and as you've probably seen in this segment, it's been very stable in tracking my face. I also found that when I did a purposeful tracking of my face moving towards and away from the camera, as you can see here, that it did an effective job of keeping autofocus where it should be in a smooth fashion. Likewise, when I did my video focus pull test, I saw very, very positive results. Let's take a look at that. So, I mean, nothing to complain about there. It's so quiet that you can hear my cat scurrying around in the background. And so that's what you can hear in another room, that sound, rather than any kind of localized focus sounds with the onboard microphones. You know that autofocus is nice and quiet. And you saw the confidence there as well. And that's the way it's been out in the field. You know, whether I was shooting just objects, even slim, you know, shallow depth of field objects out in the field. And in this case, you can focus down quite closely. and I believe about 19 centimeters, and you can get a very useful 0.21 times magnification, which by the way is the highest figure so far in this series, and it just adds that extra layer of value in my eyes to where you can get really close and actually get a fairly soft background, as you can see with this little tiny bit of green poking up in the spring here. It also proved to be effective if it was tracking, the eyes of, say, little Loki, or I did a couple of portrait shots with my son, and you can see that it tracked the eye effectively and delivered very well-focused results. And when I've used it for video work as well, I can see that IAF is tracking well, and it's just been a nice, stable platform. So kudos to them for further progress on that. This is also, in some ways, maybe the most impressive lens in the series optically. 24mm is not incredibly wide, and so it's not as hard to engineer as wider focal lengths, but it's still wide enough, and I've tested enough 24mm lenses to know that there's certainly a lot of margin for error there. And fortunately, they've been able to avoid a lot of those things. There is a mild to moderate amount of barrel distortion, and while it's not perfectly linear, it is reasonably linear, and so I was able to get a fairly good, if not perfect, manual correction with a +8. Likewise, the vignette is what I would call moderate at right under 2 stops in the corners, a +48 in a Lightroom slider, and moving the midpoint all the way over to 0 was enough to correct it fairly effectively, I felt. Beyond that, aberrations were very well controlled with very little evidence of longitudinal chromatic aberration and no evidence of lateral chromatic aberration. Then, when I began to dive into sharpness, I found that the lens was very impressively sharp wide open, much sharper than what I saw with the Viltrox 24mm F1.8 that I reviewed a month or so ago. And because it performed so well there, I thought I'd go back and compare to a very strong, one of my favorite wide-angle primes. Not quite the same focal length, but the Sony FE 20mm F1.8 G lens is a fantastic little prime. But I was surprised to find that the Samyang was noticeably sharper than the 20mm G lens when I compared them side by side. I even compared it to the 35mm F1.4 G Master lens that I happened to be reviewing at the same time. And no, it's not as good as the G Master, but it didn't embarrass itself either. And it was reasonably close, even though the G Master is a bit sharper with a little bit better contrast at equivalent apertures. So overall, a very strong optical performance, and that carried out into real-world shooting as well. Whether I was shooting at wide apertures of f1.8, it proved very sharp, and then of course at typical landscape apertures, f5.6, f8, it was extremely sharp, even on a high-resolution 50 megapixel body, and gave lots of texture information, good contrast for monochromes, which I felt looked very good, and also I felt like colors were quite good out of the lens as well. The bokeh quality is good in some situations, less good in other situations. As I find with many wide-angle lenses, it depends a lot about the ratio of the distance to the subject to the background that can make a big difference as to the quality of the bokeh. And so in some cases I felt it was good, some cases I felt it was a little bit busy. It's certainly not going to rival the, say, 24mm f1.4 G Master when it comes to the bokeh quality, though it's not really all that far behind in sharpness. It was also effective for astrophotography, which they're marketing it for, showing low degrees of coma, and of course that nifty little feature that takes guesswork out of focusing for shooting the night skies. And so a great focal length for that, a great maximum aperture of f1.8, making it a very useful lens all around. And that is true of the lens in general. As I said, I think that the sum total of the various parts of this lens make it the best execution of this formula yet in Samyang's Tiny series. This is a lens that I anticipate using a lot because it's so convenient to bring along. At only 230 grams, if you throw it into your bag or even into your pocket, you're not going to regret bringing it along even if you don't happen to shoot with it on that particular outing. And that's just something you can't say for larger, heavier lenses that in many cases are going to end up staying home rather than going into the field with you. And at right under $500, this represents strong value, and compared to a lens like the Sony 20mm F1.8, this lens is, about $400 cheaper. So that's a significant amount of savings and well worth your consideration. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review. Also linkage there to an image gallery if you want to check out more photos or look at them a little bit longer. Beyond that, there are buying links if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. There's linkage there to purchase some of my merch. There's a lot of great options there. Sign up for my newsletter. It comes out every Thursday. Become a patron. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Be sure to ring that bell and get notifications when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.